The stars trembled as Drake wept. For over 500 years, the Dragon Emperor had ruled the vast Draconian Empire with his wife Vera by his side. Their empire wasn't just big, it was enormous, stretching across thousands of planets, home to hundreds of different alien species who lived under their watchful protection. Drake and Vera weren't ordinary rulers. The Draconians were an ancient species who had evolved from dragon-like creatures on their home world. Over millions of years they had grown tall and powerful, with scales that shimmered like galaxies and minds that could reach across space itself. Their thoughts were so strong they could feel each other's emotions from across star systems. The royal couple's mind link kept peace throughout their realm. When pirates or rebels caused trouble, Drake and Vera would join their thoughts together and send waves of calm across the stars. No weapons needed, just the gentle push of their combined mental power. But 3 weeks ago something terrible happened. Vera fell sick with a strange illness no doctor could explain. Her shimmering scales turned dull gray. Her once brilliant mind grew foggy. Drake called the best healers from every corner of the empire, but none could help. They watched helplessly as the illness ate away at her body and mind until, with one final smile at her husband, Vera closed her eyes forever. "I can't rule without her," Drake whispered to the empty throne room, his massive clawed hands trembling. "I can't even think straight anymore." Drake's grief wasn't just sad, it was dangerous. The Draconian's emotions affected reality itself. As the Emperor fell deeper into sadness, strange things began happening throughout the Empire. Gravity on some planets suddenly doubled, crushing buildings and crops. Communication systems filled with static that sounded like crying. Starships reported navigation computers showing all paths leading back to the Imperial Palace, as if the universe itself wanted to comfort the grieving Emperor. The 12 members of the Draconian High Council met in their grand chamber beneath twin moons. Their long necks bent toward each other as they whispered their fears. "The Emperor hasn't eaten in days," said Counselor Ben, the oldest among them. His scales had faded to pale blue with age. 3 star systems have reported gravity fluctuations, added Counselor Roy, tapping a glowing screen with a claw. "If this continues, planets will be torn apart." "We've sent 36 different people to comfort him," whispered Counselor Tina. "Poets, musicians, philosophers from 100 worlds. He refuses to see anyone." "The Empire will collapse if something isn't done," Ben said, looking out at the night sky where strange ripples now disturbed the stars themselves. Drake's grief is literally bending reality. Far away, at the very edge of the Empire, a small human colony struggled to survive on a rocky planet called New Hope. Humans were newcomers to the galaxy. Drake and Vera had discovered Earth only 70 years ago and welcomed humans into their empire. Most aliens found humans strange and small, but the dragon rulers had seen potential in the curious little species. The colony wasn't much to look at, just a collection of dome-shaped buildings and small farms clustered in a valley. Unlike the grand cities at the Empire's center, New Hope had no towering spires or floating platforms. Just simple buildings made by people trying to make a new home among the stars. In one of these simple homes, 14-year-old Penny Wilson sat up in bed, breathing hard. She pushed her tangled hair out of her eyes and reached for the notebook beside her bed. This was the 5th night in a row she'd had the same dream. "It's getting clearer," she whispered, sketching quickly. The dream always showed the same thing, an enormous dragon-like being curled around an empty throne, weeping tears that fell as shooting stars. In the dream, Penny could feel the dragon's sadness like it was her own. Penny hadn't told anyone about the dreams. Her dad would just worry, he already had enough problems trying to keep their farm running after Mom died last year. And her teachers would probably just say it was stress from the upcoming colony exams. But the dreams felt important. Real. Like someone was calling to her across space. Outside her window, the night sky flickered strangely. The stars seemed to pulse in time with a heartbeat. Some colonists claimed communications with other worlds had become spotty. Strange weather patterns had appeared out of nowhere. The adults whispered about solar flares or magnetic storms, but Penny knew better. Someone very powerful was crying and somehow she could hear it. What Penny didn't know was that her brain waves were doing something completely unique. While the greatest minds in the Empire couldn't reach the grieving Emperor, her simple human dreams were somehow tuning into his sorrow. And soon, very soon, the Empire would come looking for the impossible human girl who could feel a dragon's tears. The morning sun hadn't even risen over New Hope Colony when the Imperial ship arrived. It didn't land with a roar like the supply vessels that came twice a year. Instead, it hovered silently above the central square, its massive hull blocking out the stars like an artificial eclipse. Penny was helping her father load irrigation pipes onto their old rover when she saw it. The ship was beautiful, sleek and curved like a teardrop, with a surface that changed colors like oil on water. It was clearly draconian design, nothing like the boxy human ships. "Dad, look," she whispered, dropping a pipe with a clang. Her father's eyes widened. "Get inside, Penny. Now." But before either of them could move, a beam of golden light shot down from the ship's belly, and 3 tall figures materialized in the colony square. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd gathered at a safe distance, watching as colony administrator Tom pushed through, straightening his jacket nervously. The Draconians were intimidating up close. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, their bodies were covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with their movements. They had long, elegant limbs and faces that somehow blended reptilian features with almost human-like expressions. Their eyes, though, those were pure dragon with vertical pupils that took in everything. "Welcome to New Hope," Tom said, his voice cracking slightly. "We weren't expecting. I mean, we're honored by your visit, but—" The tallest Draconian raised a hand. "We seek the human-designated P937, the creature said, its voice surprisingly melodic. The crowd murmured in confusion. The Draconians used their own classification system for tracking citizens, and no one memorized their empire numbers. "Could you perhaps tell us the human name?" Tom asked. The Draconian tilted its head, consulting something on a transparent wristband. "Your designation system is inefficient. The human is female, approximately 14 solar cycles, residing in dwelling unit 47B. Penny felt her heart stop. That was her house. Her father stepped forward protectively. "That's my daughter. What do you want with her?" The Draconians turned as one, their gaze finding Penny instantly despite the crowd. The middle one, with scales that shimmered blue-green in the morning light, approached slowly. "You dream of the Emperor," it said. Not a question. Penny nodded before she could stop herself. "How did you know that?" her father demanded. The blue-green Draconian blinked slowly. "Our ship detected anomalous brainwave patterns matching Imperial frequencies. No human has ever registered on these scanners before." It turned to Penny. "You will come with us." "She's not going anywhere," her father said, stepping between them. The lead Draconian's scales flickered with what might have been impatience. "The Empire faces crisis. The Emperor's grief disrupts the fabric of space itself. 16 worlds have reported gravitational anomalies. 3 space stations have been evacuated. The High Council has sent specialists from every advanced civilization, yet none can reach him. What does that have to do with my daughter? Your offspring's brainwaves resonate at a frequency remarkably similar to the late Empress. We do not understand why, but it is unprecedented." Penny stepped around her father. "The dreams? I've been seeing him every night, a giant dragon crying around an empty throne." The Draconians exchanged looks that even their alien features couldn't hide. They were shocked. "That is impossible," whispered the smallest one. "The Emperor's meditation chamber is psychically shielded. No mind should be able to perceive him there." A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew the Draconians were powerful telepaths, but nobody understood how it worked. Humans were considered blind in the psychic sense. "Dad," Penny said quietly, "I think I need to go." "Out of the question," he replied. "The safety of trillions depends on the Emperor's stability," the lead Draconian said. "We offer fair compensation for temporary use of your offspring." "She's not property," her father shouted. Penny touched his arm. "Dad, listen. I felt his sadness every night. It's horrible. If I can help somehow." After much argument and many promises about Penny's safety, the Draconians prepared to depart with her. They gave her just 30 minutes to pack a small bag and say goodbye. "I'll be back soon," she promised her father, hugging him tightly. The journey to the Imperial capital took 3 days, even with the Draconians' advanced faster-than-light drive. Penny spent most of it staring out viewport windows at the stars streaking by like rain. The Draconians largely ignored her, except for daily brain scans that left her with a tingling sensation behind her eyes. On the final approach to the capital planet, the lead Draconian, who had reluctantly told Penny to call him Rex, finally explained what would happen. "The High Council is skeptical of your usefulness. They agreed to this meeting only because conventional methods have failed. You will be tested for psychic sensitivity first. If you pass, you may be permitted to approach the Emperor." Penny nodded, trying to hide her fear as the ship began its descent toward the most magnificent city she had ever seen. Massive spires of crystal and metal reached toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed made of light. Flying creatures of all shapes and sizes darted between buildings. The landing platform was filled with more draconians, all wearing elaborate robes and jewelry that marked their high status. They stared at Penny as if she were a bug they'd found in their food. "This is the human?" one asked, scales rippling with obvious disappointment. "Let us proceed with testing," another said dismissively. They led Penny into a circular room with walls covered in strange, shifting patterns. As the door closed behind her, the patterns began to pulse with light. "This chamber defeats most trained telepaths," Rex explained from a speaker. "Simply walk to the center." Penny took a deep breath and started forward. The patterns swirled hypnotically, designed to confuse and disorient. But strangely, she found she could see through them, not with her eyes but with something else. It felt like the patterns were trying to whisper to her, but she could simply step around the whispers. She reached the center in seconds. Through the observation window, she saw the council members staring in shock. "Impossible," one whispered. The human passed as if the defenses weren't even there. And that was when Penny knew her life would never be the same again. The throne room of the Imperial Palace was nothing like Penny had imagined. Instead of gold and jewels, it was a vast chamber with walls that seemed made of living crystal, pulsing faintly with colors that matched the mood inside. Right now, those colors were deep blue and purple, colors of mourning. The Dragon Emperor sat hunched on his massive throne, a shadow of his former self. Where once his scales had glimmered like captured starlight, they were now dull and flaking. His wings, which could span the width of a small spaceship, hung limp and tattered behind him. Most shocking were his eyes, once legendary for their piercing gaze that could read the thoughts of diplomats from across the room, now sunken and clouded. "Emperor Drake," announced the lead counselor, his voice echoing. "We bring before you a human from colony world New Hope, whose mind has somehow connected with yours." The Emperor didn't move. Didn't acknowledge them at all. "Your Majesty," the counselor tried again, "our scientists believe this human may." "Leave me," the Emperor rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. When he finally raised his head to look at the intruders, Penny gasped. It was exactly the face from her dreams, though even more haggard in reality. His gaze landed on Penny and his lip curled slightly. "You bring me a child? A human child? When the greatest telepathic minds in 16 systems have failed." The counselor stiffened, scales rippling with embarrassment. "Your Majesty, her brainwave patterns," began one. "Go," Drake commanded, and the force of his mind pushed against everyone in the room. The counselors bowed hastily and began backing toward the door, motioning for Penny to follow. But Penny stood her ground, though her legs trembled. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said simply. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, focusing properly on her for the first time. "What do you know of my lost human child?" he asked. Penny took a small step forward. "I know how it feels when someone you love is just gone. My mom died last year. Colony sickness. The doctors couldn't do anything." The guards at the door looked horrified at her casual tone, but Penny kept going. "For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Dad would find me sitting in her garden at night, just staring at nothing. Sometimes I'd smell her perfume and turn around, thinking she was there." Penny swallowed hard. But she never was. Something flickered in the Emperor's eyes, recognition perhaps. "Your people sent philosophers and priests," Penny continued. "I bet they said a lot of fancy things about time healing and honoring memories, right?" A low rumble came from the Emperor's chest, not quite a laugh but close. 36 different species sent their wisest. Their words meant nothing. "Yeah," Penny nodded. "People told me Mom was in a better place, and that everything happens for a reason." I wanted to punch them. This time the Emperor did make a sound like a laugh, though it was rough from disuse. "What is your name, human child?" "Penny." The Emperor studied her. "And what wisdom do you bring, Penny of New Hope, that the greatest minds in my empire could not provide?" Penny shrugged. "No wisdom. Just truth. It hurts. It will always hurt. But eventually you learn to carry it differently." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving of a bird, simple and worn smooth from handling. "My mom made this. First week on the colony when everything was scary and new. Sometimes I hold it when I miss her too much. Sometimes I talk to it, which is probably stupid." "It is not stupid," the Emperor interrupted, his voice softer now. "Vera's crown sits on my bedside. I have not moved it. Sometimes I speak to it as well." A silence fell between them, not awkward but somehow comfortable. Without thinking about it, Penny began to hum a tune her mother used to sing while working in their small colony garden. It wasn't particularly special, just a simple melody that rose and fell gently. The crystal walls around them suddenly pulsed with light, shifting from deep blues to softer purples and even hints of gold. The guards gasped. In the observation room adjoining the throne room, Draconian scientists stared at their instruments in disbelief. "Impossible," whispered one, a female with silver-flecked scales. "The Emperor's brainwave patterns are synchronizing with the humans." "How can this be?" demanded the chief scientist. "Human brains are primitive, lacking the tertiary psychic lobe that all advanced species develop." The scientist adjusted her instruments, rechecking the readings. "It appears that humans process emotional trauma through different neural pathways entirely. Where our species compartmentalizes grief in the psychic centers, humans integrate it across their entire neural network." "A disadvantage, surely," said another scientist. "Perhaps not," murmured the chief scientist, watching as the Emperor leaned forward, his scales brightening slightly as Penny continued humming. "Humans are forced to process grief actively, to live with it and through it. We can shield ourselves from pain temporarily, but when that shield breaks, as the Emperor's has." He gestured to the readings. "Look at this resilience pattern. It's beautiful in its simplicity." Back in the throne room, Penny had finished her song. To everyone's shock, the Emperor slowly extended one massive clawed hand. Penny hesitated, then placed her tiny human hand against one of his fingers. The size difference was absurd. Her entire hand barely covered his fingertip. "Your mind feels familiar," Drake said quietly. "Like Vera's somehow, though different." "I've been seeing you in my dreams," Penny admitted. "Every night. Just sitting there missing her." The Emperor's eyes widened. "Truly? No being has penetrated my meditation chamber before." Penny shrugged. "I don't know how it works. I just know that your sadness is really loud." For the first time in weeks, Emperor Drake straightened his posture. His wings twitched slightly as if remembering they could move. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "you should tell me about your mother, Penny of New Hope. And I shall tell you of my Vera." Weeks passed, and a strange friendship grew between the 14-year-old human girl and the ancient dragon emperor. Palace staff grew used to seeing Penny wandering the enormous hallways, sometimes alone, sometimes walking alongside Drake, looking tiny beside his massive form. The emperor's condition improved steadily. His scales regained some of their luster, and the gravitational anomalies across the empire decreased. Yet his grief remained, a constant shadow behind his eyes. "I've been thinking," Penny said one morning as they walked through the Imperial Gardens. "Why can I feel your thoughts when nobody else can?" Drake's tail swept gracefully behind him, careful not to disturb the exotic floating flowers. "The scientists believe there's something unique about human grief processing. Your species lacks our psychic abilities, yet somehow that makes you more resilient." "Huh," Penny said, hopping over a small stream. "That's cool, I guess. But it doesn't explain why I specifically connected with you." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps it doesn't." That evening, unable to sleep, Penny wandered into the Imperial Library. Unlike human libraries with books on shelves, this one was a vast dome where information floated as glowing particles of light. Most humans couldn't access it at all. The interface required psychic ability to navigate. "Can I help you, human?" asked the librarian, her scales a soft lavender color. "I'm just looking," Penny said, watching the beautiful swirls of light dance above. "What's that section over there?" She pointed to a darkened area where the particles moved sluggishly. The librarian's tail twitched with surprise. "You can see the organization system?" "Kind of. Those lights look sad." "Those are the restricted archives. Ancient texts predating the Empire itself. Most find them unreadable. They use thought patterns from before modern draconian mental structure evolved." Penny walked closer, drawn to the gloomy swirl of particles. As she approached, something strange happened. The lights began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "That's never happened before," the librarian whispered. "Can I touch them?" Penny asked. After getting permission, Penny reached out. The moment her fingertips brushed the light particles, information flooded her mind, not as words or pictures, but as feelings and impressions. Somehow she could understand them. "Whoa," she breathed. "These are about something called soul walking. Ancient draconians who could travel outside their bodies." The librarian looked skeptical. "Those are myths. Primitive superstitions from before we understood proper psychic science." But Penny kept reading, her hand moving through different clusters of light. "This part talks about consciousness existing between realms. And here, this describes something called the veil threshold, where minds can become trapped. 4 days afterward, Penny spent every spare moment in the library. She filled a notebook with scribbles and diagrams that made sense only to her. The draconian scientists watched with bemused tolerance, seeing her research as a harmless distraction. Until one morning when Penny burst into the Emperor's private study, waving her notebook. "I don't think the Empress is really dead." Drake's tail knocked over a delicate crystal sculpture in surprise. "What?" Penny spread her notes across his massive desk. According to these ancient texts, when a draconian with strong psychic abilities undergoes certain medical procedures, there's a risk of consciousness separation. I think that's what happened to Vera. Child, the Empress underwent experimental treatment for her illness, but her body died. I watched it happen. Pain laced the Emperor's voice. Yes, her body died, Penny insisted, but what if her mind, her soul or whatever you call it, got stuck somewhere else? The texts talk about this place called the Between, where consciousness can exist without a physical form. The Emperor studied her notes with growing interest, but when Penny presented her theory to the Imperial scientists, they dismissed it immediately. Primitive superstition, scoffed the chief scientist, barely glancing at her work. These ancient texts were written before we understood proper psychic mechanics. The human is confusing metaphor with reality. But what about these coordinates? Penny pointed to a complex set of equations she pieced together. They describe a dimensional frequency that matches the Empress's brainwave pattern. Coincidence, the scientist said firmly. Besides, even if such a place existed, we have no technology to access it. The dimensional array is calibrated for physical matter transport, not whatever this is supposed to be. Despite the rejection, Drake ordered the scientists to investigate further. But after weeks of tests that went nowhere, even he began to lose hope. I appreciate your efforts, Penny, he said gently, but perhaps we must accept that Vera is truly gone. Penny, however, wasn't ready to give up. Late one night, she snuck into the main science laboratory where the dimensional array stood, a massive ring of crystalline technology that allowed the Draconians to fold space for transportation. The night guard, recognizing the Emperor's little human friend, let her observe from a safe distance. But Penny had other plans. She'd noticed something the Draconian scientists had missed. Their technology worked on pure logic, following strict mathematical rules. But the coordinates she'd discovered required something else: intuition and feeling. The array needs to feel her, Penny whispered to herself, remembering how her mother used to say that finding lost things was more about remembering the feeling of them than looking in the right places. When the guard stepped away to complete his rounds, Penny darted forward. From her pocket, she pulled a small crystal she'd borrowed from the Emperor's quarters, one that had belonged to Vera. Working quickly, she inserted it into a slot in the control panel and began adjusting settings. Where the Draconian interface used complex equations, Penny followed her instincts, making changes based on how they felt rather than their mathematical precision. It was like tuning an old radio, searching for a specific frequency by ear rather than by numbers. "What are you doing?" the guard shouted, returning to find her hands deep in the sacred technology. "Finding the Empress," Penny replied, making one final adjustment before the guard could pull her away. The dimensional array hummed to life, its center beginning to shimmer not with the usual blue light of spatial transport, but with a strange, pearly glow that no one had ever seen before. News of Penny's unauthorized experiments spread through the palace like wildfire. The dimensional array had overloaded, causing power failures throughout the science wing before emergency systems kicked in. Worse, the crystal she had borrowed from the Emperor, a priceless royal heirloom, had shattered into dust. "Tampering with Imperial technology is high treason," announced the chief judge, his black scales gleaming in the harsh light of the detention cell where Penny now sat. "The penalty is death, regardless of age or species." "I just needed to try," Penny said quietly. "I know the Empress is out there." The guards exchanged pitying looks. The human child had clearly lost her mind. Emperor Drake intervened personally, postponing any punishment until after the Imperial mourning ceremony, a grand event marking 100 days since Vera's passing. It was tradition that after this ceremony, the Empire would officially move forward, and the Emperor would begin appearing in public again. On the morning of the ceremony, thousands gathered in the Grand Plaza outside the palace. Representatives from all corners of the Empire arrived in ships of every description. The Draconians wore special scale paint in blues and silvers, colors of remembrance. Drake himself would wear the formal mourning cloak, woven from starlight and shadow. As preparations continued, Penny sat in her guarded room, staring out the window at the three moons hanging low in the morning sky. You've got one more chance, she whispered to herself. Make it count. The door slid open, revealing Emperor Drake in his magnificent ceremonial attire. Despite the formal occasion, his eyes were kind as he looked at the small human who had become his unlikely friend. It is time, Penny, he said. After today's ceremony, we must discuss your return to your colony. Penny stood, smoothing down the special blue dress they'd made for her. Before we go, can I ask one favor? One last crazy human request. The Emperor tilted his massive head. What is it? Let me try again. With the dimensional array. During the ceremony, Drake's expression hardened. You nearly destroyed the science wing. The array is still being repaired. That's just it, they're fixing it wrong, Penny insisted. They're following the same logical patterns that didn't work before. But what if the between isn't a logical place? What if it's like dreams or emotions or music? Penny? Please, she interrupted, something she'd never dared do before. You trusted me enough to let me help with your grief. Trust me one more time. After a long pause, Drake sighed, a sound like wind through ancient mountains. The ceremony has a moment of silence for contemplation. During that time, only that time, you may access the auxiliary array in the West Tower. One attempt, supervised by guards. The ceremony began with all the grandeur expected from the greatest empire in the galaxy. Processions of representatives circled the plaza, each carrying symbols from their worlds. Musicians played melodies so beautiful they brought tears to eyes of species that had never wept before. Poets recited verses in 100 languages. Through it all, Penny waited nervously in the West Tower, watching through a window as Emperor Drake sat on a ceremonial throne at the plaza's center, his massive wings folded in respect. When the moment of silence finally began, Penny turned to the smaller dimensional array. 2 guards stood watchfully nearby, ready to stop her at the first sign of danger. I need something personal of the Emperor's, she said. Something connected to both him and the Empress. The guards hesitated, then one removed a small scale-shaped badge from his uniform. This contains a drop of the Emperor's blood. All royal guards carry one to prove our loyalty. Perfect. Penny placed it carefully in the center of the array and began adjusting controls, not with precise calculations but by feeling, like tuning an instrument by ear. The guards tensed as the machine began to hum. This is reckless, one muttered. Penny ignored him, closing her eyes and thinking of the Emperor's sadness, of Vera's smile described so lovingly in Drake's stories, of the feeling of loss she knew from her own mother's passing. The array's hum deepened, then rose to a piercing whine. Light flooded the room, not the controlled blue glow of normal operation, but wild, crackling energy that spilled out in jagged patterns. Shut it down, shouted a guard reaching for the controls. Before he could touch them, a tremendous crack split the air. The array didn't just fail, it exploded, sending shards of crystal flying across the room. The guards threw themselves down, covering their heads as alarms blared throughout the palace. Below in the plaza, the ceremony erupted into chaos. Emperor Drake rose from his throne, eyes fixed on the West Tower where smoke now billowed from broken windows. Seize the human, shouted the chief judge, already rushing toward the tower with guards in tow. This time there will be no mercy. Penny stood in the center of the destruction, cuts on her face and arms, but strangely calm. Something was happening in the space where the array had been, a swirling, shimmering light that didn't behave like fire or electricity. By the time Drake burst into the room, pushing past his own guards, the chief judge was already pronouncing sentence. High treason against the imperial throne. The punishment is... Wait, Penny said quietly, her eyes fixed on the swirling light. She's here. The room fell silent. The light continued to pulse, growing stronger rather than fading. What nonsense is this? Demanded the judge. But Drake stepped forward, his eyes widening. I feel something. The light swirled faster, forming a vague shape that shifted and changed constantly. Penny reached out her hand toward it without fear. I can see her, Penny whispered. She's beautiful. This is a trick, the judge snarled. An insult to the Empress's memory. But Drake moved closer, an expression of wonder spreading across his face. Vera, he whispered. The light pulsed brightly in response. Penny turned to Drake, her eyes shining with tears and reflecting the strange light. She can't take physical form again. Her body is gone. But her mind, her soul, it was trapped in the between just like the ancient texts said. How can we be sure this is truly the Empress? The chief scientist demanded. Penny smiled. Ask her something only she would know. Drake knelt beside Penny, bringing his massive head down to her level. His voice shook as he spoke. On our first night together I gave you a gift. What was it? The light swirled but no sound came forth. Penny closed her eyes, concentrating. She says, it wasn't a thing. It was a promise. You took her to see the birth of a star and promised her that your love would outlive even that star's long life. Drake's entire body trembled. Tears fell from his eyes, sizzling against his hot scales. It is her. It is truly her. For the next hour, Penny served as a translator between husband and wife, her simple human mind somehow able to bridge the gap between dimensions that the advanced draconian technology couldn't cross. She described what Vera showed her, how the Empress's consciousness had been caught between worlds during her treatment, unable to stay but unable to go, watching her husband's grief without any way to reach him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the broken windows, Drake finally turned to address the stunned court officials. Today marks a new chapter for our empire, he announced, his voice stronger than it had been in months. The human child Penny has done what our greatest minds could not. Through her, I can speak with my beloved again. He placed one massive clawed hand gently on Penny's shoulder. From this day forward, humans shall be recognized as an officially protected species throughout our empire. Their unique abilities, their emotional intelligence, their intuitive thinking, their capacity to bridge worlds through feeling rather than logic. These are not weaknesses as we once thought, but powerful gifts. The light that was Vera's consciousness swirled in what appeared to be approval. The chief scientist stepped forward hesitantly. Your Majesty, we could study this phenomenon, perhaps develop technology to. Drake shook his head. Some things cannot be reduced to technology. Some connections transcend logic. He looked down at Penny with newfound respect. Sometimes, it takes a child to remind us of what truly matters.